Welcome back, fellow Illumineers, to be our guest. It is that time again. I'm out of hibernation. It is time to do our Lorcana Limited draft and sealed set reviews. You've all been asking for it. You've been chiming for it. All of you, at least a handful of you, have been asking for it, and we are back. I'm so excited to be here with you for Whispers in the Well, set 10. We're into double digits already. Where has the time gone? Oh my goodness, I can't believe we are already at set 10 for Lorcana already, and it is showing no signs of slowing down, and I'm excited for that. So hopefully you're all looking forward to your set release weekends. Hopefully you're doing some draft or some sealed, even if you're doing pack rush. This is a good way to kind of figure out what cards are going to work best for you in a limited environment. So, for anyone that's new here, quick breakdown. Over the next 6 videos, I'm going to review the entire set of Whispers in the Well, and I'm going to do it broken up by ink cost. So I'm going to review 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, all the way to our last video of 6+ drops. I lumped them all together. It's from 6 to 8 in this set. And I do that because in a limited format, in a sealed or draft format, it is so critical to have a smooth curve. You want to start with a handful of 1 drops, a little more 2 drops, have your curve cap at around 3 or 4 drops, have the most of those. Scale down a little bit on the 5 drops, and have, again, only a small handful of 6+ drops in your deck. So, as you go through these videos, it's really important that you think about, okay, what are the best cards to have at each ink cost, but more specifically, what are the densities and ratios that I need to have of each so that I have a smooth curve? You can have all the best 1 and 2 drops, but if you don't have any 3 or 4s or not enough of them, then it's not going to be a very good deck, right? So make sure you think about the ink curve as well, not just which are the best cards, period. Anyone that tells you you always just take the best card or put the best cards in, you need to have a smooth ink curve along the way. So we're going to go through those videos. I'm also going to do a quick hit video about just top cards at each ink cost, just in case you don't have time to watch all of these many videos. But if you do, I appreciate it. And it'll give you a lot more insight. I don't have the time to give you my full thoughts in that video. These videos, these thorough deep dives are the ones where I'm going to explain why I feel the way I do about them. So hopefully it'll train you to start making your own assessments. Because at the end of the day, this is just one voice. This is just my play style and the way that I've been successful in draft and in limited. And I have been very successful in limited, and that's great, but that is not the be all and end all. Right? There's many different perspectives out there. And to that end, I encourage you, unfortunately, there's not a ton of content creators making limited content right now, but absorb as much as you can. If you really want to do well in limited, absorb as much as you can. There's at least a few great creators out there making content. I would recommend at the very least you check out Nive's Nerd Corner. I'll put it in the description below, but he always puts out a nice brief primer each set, the antithesis of these videos. He puts out a nice brief description of his insights. And then Frank Carson always does an article. He needs no introduction. The winner of DLC Milwaukee and a famed limited player in his own right. He makes a list of his rankings every set, and that is must consume content if you're serious about doing well with limited. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Past Heath, who will go through our ranking systems, and then we're going to dive into our 1-drop video. Take it away, Heath.
So we're going to do A, B, C, D, F as our rating system. A is first pickable and happy to first pick it. This is a bomb or just a really effective card. There are commons that are absolutely within this territory, but ultimately it's something that you're just like, you open your pack, you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is the one for me. Love this one. Happy to have it, right? That's an A. B is, I'll first pick it, but I'm not going to be absolutely thrilled about it, but I'm definitely very happy to pick this up and have this in my deck. I will always play this card, and I'm going to kind of be picking it in the first half of the pack. C's are your like journeyman staples of your deck. you're almost always going to play these cards unless you've drafted so well that your deck's just crammed full of A's and B's. So you're always going to play these cards, or almost always. But you're not exactly thrilled to be taking them. You're just like, okay, these are cards that are going to fill out my deck, right? These are the cards that you want kind of in the middle to last half of the pack, and they're solid. D is, ideally, I'd like to not have this in my deck. I will play this, but I'd like to not have this in my deck if I can help it, and I'm certainly not wasting any early picks on it. These are cards that you are going to be picking up because it's the only cards left in the last third of the pack, right? Ideally, these should all be inkable. If they're that bad, you should not be taking an uninkable card that's that quality, right? And then F is don't play it. And usually that's because they're uninkable and they're like D quality and uninkable. But it could also, there could be some inkable cards that I rate as S just because they're so bad. And in that case, obviously, if they're inkable and you need ink, you're going to play them in your deck because you're only eliminating 8 cards that you drafted. So if you have, 8 uninkables that are Fs, you're going to play an F that's inkable, of course, right? But you should try never to have this anywhere near your deck, and you should only be using it as ink if I've got an inkable F in there.
All right, we're back, and I lied, because there's actually one other thing before we dive into it that I want to cover, which is just to establish that we need to acknowledge something about what's changed with Whispers in the Well over the last 9 sets. Sets 1 through 9 had a pretty static expectation in terms of vanilla stat lines, in terms of your 1 cost 2 2s and 1 3s, your 2 cost 2 3s and 3 2s, your 3 cost 3 4s and 4 3s, and so on and so forth, right? They were all pretty much standard throughout those 9 sets. We had a few different improvements or shifts in that. For the most part, it stayed true. Whereas things seem to have shifted relatively dramatically in Whispers in the Well. Now we have several 2 cost 3 3s and 3 cost 4 4s and so on and so forth, right? So the vanilla math has changed because I've always compared a lot of cards to the vanilla stat lines. Hey, if it's below the vanilla stat line, is the ability enough to compensate for that and potentially and then some, right? That math has changed. Now it's all relative, right? As long as everything kind of shifts up together, then it's all relative, right? Then the kind of ecosystem of the set by itself remains relatively the same, and we just got to adjust what we're comparing it to. From what I've found in this set, that's not necessarily the case, but for the most part, it does hold true. So just so you know, the way that I've assessed things, the kind of math that I've done, and I apologize that I have to introduce math into this any more than necessary, but the math that I've done is that I think, especially around the 3, 4, 5 costs, where we're going to have the majority of our deck anyway, that on average, if we attribute strength and willpower to each be worth about 1/3 of an ink, and each lore to be worth about 2/3 of an ink, that's going to kind of give us a good baseline, right? If things are at or above that vanilla stat line, even if they're not vanillas, great. If it's below that, then we've got to determine if the ability makes up for that. Those aren't going to hold as true on the lower end of the spectrum, where we expect more strength, willpower, and lore for the cost, or the higher end of the ink cost, where we would expect less. But for 3, 4, 5 costs, that'll hold out to be relatively the case. So let's dive into our 1 costs and see how we feel about these. Now, traditionally, 1 costs are going to be relatively low power. Shocking, I know. But I've usually been fairly encouraging of drafting 1-drops. I like a tempo gameplay where I'll have kind of a mid-range or more aggro mid-range strategy. I don't like going hyper aggro. I don't like just turning things sideways and hoping I get there. But I do like to kind of control the early game and then go aggro before my opponent that might have drafted a lot more top end can get there, right? So I usually encourage drafting 1-drops. I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this set, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the best idea going forward, because what you're going to see as I go through these is that the vanilla stat line for 1-drops hasn't really improved. Maybe a hair, but hasn't really improved, whereas the vanilla stat lines beyond 1-drops have. So as a result, by contrast, the value of 1-drops is lessened. So we're not going into anything other than 1-drops today, so I don't really have anything to show you to demonstrate that. But trust me when I say, as we go through subsequent videos, you're going to see that the relative value of 1-drops is diminished this set, which means that we have to really seriously consider whether we even want to be taking them. As long as they're inkable, it's not the end of the world, but still something to consider. All right, so let's start with Big Nose here. We've got Big Nose, Lovesick Poet. He is your standard 1-ink 1/3/1 lore. So this is the vanilla stat line that we're used to. But again, when all the other vanilla stat lines seem to have gone up, as a result, this has gone down. I was never a big fan of this stat line to begin with. All it does is survive one more turn than the 2/2, whereas the 2/2 might have actually traded with something in the past, like a vanilla 3/2, for example, for 2. But that's no longer the case even for the 2/2, which we'll get into shortly. So as a result, I always had this relatively low, but now at this point, this has firmly gone into D territory for me, which is that I never want to play this. I don't want to actively draft it. If I'm stuck with one of these and I need some inkables, then I'll have it, because at the end of the day, having a character that can quest for lore is better than a character or something that doesn't quest for lore. But still, this is a firm D for me. I'm much faster, but I'm not much faster. This is a inkable song. Chosen character gains alert, which is a new keyword ability, which effectively just means that it can challenge on your turn as though it has evasive. Previously, we'd had characters that got evasive on your turn and not on your opponent's turn. This is effectively accomplishing the same thing, except it doesn't work aligned with things that check for evasive, like Dumbo, Ninth Wonder of the Universe from the last set from Fabled. So this gets alert and challenger +2 this turn. Hopefully, anyone that's been here before is going to know how I feel about this, which is to say, in any limited format, you need ways to deal with evasives. You either need to have evasives of your own or ways to deal with evasives. So this falls under that category as something that you need. However, I hate or hate having to like cards that deal with evasives but are negative card advantage, which is to say, if I'm taking one of my characters and I'm taking this card and I'm combining them to go in and challenge my opponent's evasive character, if I trade with that character, I have now 2 for 1 to myself. I've used 2 cards to get rid of their 1 negative card advantage. This is something I'm going to preach often in these videos and will continue to, and apologies if you've heard this a million times before, but it's important for anyone that's new here to know that limited is a war of attrition. Limited environments are you're kind of bashing against each other, and whoever runs out of cards first tends to lose. So if you're never drawing cards, or if you're giving yourself negative card advantage with cards like this, you might well lose. Now, if your opponent's able to quest for 2 with an evasive character every turn, you might lose that way too. So I'm not to say never take this, but try to find better evasive answers than this. For me, this is a desperation move. This is, I don't have any other answers to evasives. I need something. I guess it's going to be this, right? But barring that, I would hope that you don't have to play this. As a result, I've got this in a D as well. I would have it in a higher D, but I'd have it as a D. I can't stress this enough. For me, the D category is either cards that aren't really good enough to want to actively draft, but at least they're inkable, so maybe I play them, or cards like this that hopefully most of the time I can ink it, but there are niche situations where I might need it or be able to use it. Moving on, Castle of the Horned King. It is an inkable location. It is 1 move cost, 5 willpower, 0 lore. Once during your turn, whenever a character quests here, you may ready chosen item. Item strategies in limited don't tend to work. Every once in a while, an item will come along that is solid for limited. There's actually a couple in the set that I'm going to recommend. But on the whole, items don't tend to work. So I don't think that this is going to be good at all, especially since it doesn't produce lore. So this is one of those ones that I would categorize as a hard F. I just realized I don't have an F category in here. That's not usual for me. Normally I have... can I add one? Add a row below. Excellent. Look at me go. F. So normally I keep Fs for uninkables, but every once in a while I'll throw in what I refer to as an inkable F because I just don't want you touching it at all. Just stay away from this. Chomp. It is an inkable action. Deal 2 damage to chosen damaged character. Now we had an uninkable version of this in the first chapter, and I hated it then. I don't hate this as much because it's inkable. So being able to ink it is positive, and removal is both critical in limited as well as hard to come by. So one might argue it's inkable, it's removal, it's hard to come by. Great, right? Not so much. The problem is that dealing damage to damaged characters is bad for 2 reasons. One, it means they probably already got value out of it, right? If it's damaged already, chances are it's a character that maybe they got a favorable challenge on your character on. So that's not great. Again, that 2-for-1 situation. They challenged your character and removed it. Their character remained on the board. You had to use Chomp to get rid of it. You used 2 cards to their 1. Negative card advantage, you're losing that word attrition. So that's the first bad thing. The second bad thing is it's a hoop to jump through. I talk about kind of varying degrees of hoops to jump through in these videos. If it's a relatively easy hoop to jump through, maybe not so bad. If it's a lot harder to jump through, obviously bad. I know, really shocking. But in the case of a damaged character, you'd think that's going to be relatively common. It's not as common as you'd think. It tends to be a lot of characters trade, right? So there may be situations where there's a really strong character and it's like, I'm happy to 2-for-1 myself on this because it's so good that if that's the worst case scenario, fine. But most of the time, I'm either not going to find a damaged character or it's going to be their 3-cost 4/4 that's run into my 3/3, and that's not great to be 2-for-1ing myself on. So as a result, it's another D, right? Every once in a while, it's going to be useful. For the most part, it's ink. Detective's Badge, inkable item. You can exert it and pay 1 ink. Chosen character gains resist +1 and the detective classification until the start of your next turn. I think this might be the first item ever that gives a classification, right? Basically the subtype of a character. So there are detective synergies in this set. If you check out Nive's Nerd Corner, he's going to talk about synergies on there. So there's 2 main synergies in this set, and one of them is detectives. I can tell you that there isn't enough going on for me in the detective sphere for me to really want to commit a whole card to making my characters detectives. But there are decent cards that are payoffs for the detective synergy. So if you're already actively having drafted those because they're good on their own, and then this comes out late in the pack, might be worth it to take a flyer on it. But the resist +1 is not enough to dedicate a card to. You effectively need to get good value out of this 2, maybe 3 times for it to be worth a whole card. But the detective classification might be worth more. So we're going to have to take it on face value, which is to say, assuming you don't have the detective synergies and don't actively be going after the synergies, then it becomes another kind of D, and I would mark this as a relatively low D. Maybe not as bad even as the 1/3. It's so bad. A 1-cost 1/3 at this point. Synergies are not worth pursuing if you're not taking cards to be good on their own. Most of the time, the synergies aren't going to line up. So you got to take cards that are good on their own, and if the synergies do start lining up, then maybe there's something there, right? But don't start taking things just hoping that you're going to make the detective synergy work. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. Speaking of pronunciations, you're going to see me pronounce a couple of cards that I do know how to pronounce with Stephen Gettle's YouTube channel. On Twitter, you might know him for this Today in Lorcana History. Sorry, Stephen. It is now almost 1 a.m. I don't know how to pronounce Elonhui. I'll be honest, I did not watch Black Cauldron ever. I know, shame on me. It just didn't really seem like my thing. I will check it out at some point, I promise you. Feel free to flame me in the comments for it. Anyways, she is a inkable 2/1 1 lore with support. She is basically Basil that you've been seeing in all the Blurple decks in Constructed in Amber now. Now, when that set came out in Limited, that was a really good 1-drop, right? 1-drop support 2, even if it got banished, that's a pretty good trade-off there. Again, the value, something that was good before, if it's exactly the same now, chances are it's not quite as valuable now because the size of the bodies have increased. So she's not as valuable as she was before, but she's still one of the better 1-drops. She's in kind of the C to C plus territory, right? You're going to be able to make good use of her, but she's not going to be great. If you happen to draft the legendary Rapunzel that we'll talk about the 2-drops, then maybe she goes up a little bit. She's fine. She's going to be playable. She's going to be something you're not going to mind to drop on turn 1, and you will find use for it later on. Finnick, Tiny Terror, Inkable 1/2/1 lore. When you play this character, you may pay 2 ink to return chosen opposing character with 2 strength or less to their player's hand. Not good enough. Again, I mentioned I like tempo plays. This could be an aggressive deck, somewhat useful. The problem is twofold. One is you're left with a 1/2 body. I kind of liked Kick Cloud Kicker in what was it in Inklands going back? Oh my goodness, I can't remember. That it was in. It is 1 a.m. as I mentioned, but at least you got a 2/2 body left over with that tempo boost. With this one, you're leaving a 1/2 body behind, which is really rough, and it doesn't sing. There is the occasional song you might want to sing at 3 cost or less. 1-drop does not do that. I don't think that this is going to be good enough. I've got this again in that D territory, and I would probably put it right about there. There's going to be a lot of Ds, I'll tell you right now. All right. Speaking of synergies, the other synergy in this set is the spectral synergy, the whisper synergy, basically the boost synergy. So boost is a new ability we've got on Flynn Rider, Spectral Scoundrel here. He's an inkable 1/2/1 lore with boost 2. Once per turn, you may pay 2 ink to put the top card of your deck under him. Now, for all intents and purposes, all that does is to indicate that he's kind of active. His boost is active. If you bounce him back to your hand or things affect him, the card will come with it. That's great. But for the most part, just consider it. The card goes underneath just to indicate that his boost is active. While there is a card underneath him, he gets +2 strength and +1 lore, which means he's a 3/2/2 lore. Now, this is where the boost mechanic is, I'm going to say this kind of once per ink cost. With the boost mechanic, you're going to want to factor in what's the total cost that I've paid relative to what I'm getting. But you also need to consider that kind of paying it on layaway, paying it split over multiple turns, is effectively worth more than paying it outright. What do I mean by that? If I paid 3 ink for this in 1 turn, I had to pay it all at once. It would not be as valuable to have a 3/2/2 lore than to pay 1 cost on 1 turn and 2 cost on the other, right? Being able to split it up, having that flexibility, and also being able to do it faster. I can start questing for 2 for this on turn 2. Means more than paying 3 for it. But still, at the end of the day, you kind of do want to add up the total ink spent to get a relative idea of what we're talking about. So, in the olden days, I would have said that a 3-cost 3/3/2 lore was the vanilla stat line. Well, that's no longer the case. We don't have an equivalent yet in this set, but still, when the 1 lore character value has gone up for the 3-cost, one must assume that so does the 2 lore character, right? We've now got the 3-cost 4/4/1 lore in the vanilla stat line. So it's below even the old vanilla stat line, but the fact that you can get it going on turn 2, you can start questing with the 3/2/2 lore on turn 2 is pretty good. Also, there are some great boost payoffs. The problem with the boost synergy is that looking at the commons and uncommons, I'm going to tell you right now, there's really only 6 that I actively like. in commons and uncommons. You can't really guarantee or count on getting more than commons and uncommons. The rares, the super rares, the legendaries, they might not show up. Rares may be a little bit more likely, right? But you can't count on those. So you really got to focus on, I'm more likely to see the commons and uncommons. When there's only 6 total in the set that are solid at common and uncommon, I'm probably not going to get that many boost characters, which means building a synergy around it probably isn't going to work. But if I like this as a 1-drop, and I happen to get some other stuff that works with boosts that are good on their own, again, and then they start working together, hey, even better. So it's worth factoring in that the boost mechanic can have payoffs that matter, but don't chase them, is kind of what I'm saying. All right, so again, as a 1-drop solid, if I had to pay for 3 for this outright, not that happy with it. So I've got this as a C+. He is out of order. All right. Moving on, get to safety. It is an inkable action. Play a location will cost 3 or less from your discard for free. Then if you have a location named Sleepy Hollow and play, draw a card. Well, I'm going to tell you outright, Sleepy Hollow is not good, and any action that involves a location limited is just outright awful. Henwen's Vision, inkable action. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck, put 1 on the top of the deck, and the rest on the bottom in any order. This is not getting you a card. You're spending a card simply to filter. Again, for anyone that's been here before, you're going to know what I'm going to say, but for anyone that's new, anyone in the back, when you're dealing with this war of attrition that I talked about, and you're paying a whole card to filter through your deck, that is bad. Now, I've liked some stuff in the past that have allowed you to filter repeatedly, but this is one time. And I can tell you in Limited that you will occasionally get a bomb, a really powerful card. And you will have some cards that aren't very powerful. But on average, like once these 6 videos are done, you're going to see the average card is in that C category. The majority of the cards in the set are in that C category, which means that your average card is going to be about a C quality. And the difference between those 4 cards in terms of power level probably not going to be that significant, which means that I've paid a whole card, not just to filter, but to filter from maybe a C- that I was going to draw next turn to a C+ instead, which is just not nearly enough. Yes, if you find that bomb, you're going to feel real good about it. Hey, I wasn't going to draw that bomb for 4 turns, and now I'm going to draw it next turn. All right, Henwen's Vision. No, not good enough. You need to. The reason why Develop Your Brain and Visions of the Future is so powerful is because it puts the card in your hand, right? It allows you to not just filter, but draw the card back. It does not cost you the card. So this I'm going to put as a hard F because I just don't want you touching it. Nowhere near it. Higgins, I mentioned the vanillas. 1 cost, 2/2, 1 lore, inkable. It is a detective for those synergies, but still not worth it. I think that ultimately we're going to have to really devalue these 1-drops, and the 1-drop haters out there are probably saying, I've been telling you this all along. I can tell you, previous sets, I did not agree with you, but at this point I do. I think I might still have this at a C-, just because I kind of want to have at least a couple of 1-drops, and I'm assuming that I'm not necessarily going to get the best ones, but it could definitely be a D+. All right, we finally got one that's actually solid, which is Mother Gothel, inkable, 2/1, 1 lore. If a character was banished this turn, this character gets +2 strength. Okay, so on the surface, it's a 1 cost 2/1, not very good. But if I can pump this up to 4 strength, now we're talking, right? Now it could trade with a 3-drop, maybe even a weak 4-drop. So I like that. Now it's going to be one that you're probably going to have to be patient on. You're probably going to have to sit back on and wait for your opponent to expose themselves and be vulnerable to the point where you can take really good advantage of this and make a really favorable trade. I'm much more interested in card advantage than I'm ink advantage, which is to say I trade my 1-drop for your 3-drop. That's an ink advantage. Card advantage is much more important, but ink advantage is still very relevant. So yeah, like Mother Gothel, have her at a C+ still, but I think probably the best one yet. Mushu's Rocket. Inkable item. When you play this character, chosen character gains rush this turn. You may pay 2 ink and banish this. Chosen character gains rush this turn. So it is a 2 times rush, right? First one is 1 cost, second time is 2 cost. So Rush is a tough one because Rush is one of the more powerful abilities in Limited. I would say Evasive, and then probably Bodyguard, and then Rush after that. I mean, you could make arguments for others for Resist and things like that. But Rush kind of acts like semi-removal, which is to say, if my opponent's quested and I draw a character, if it has Rush, I can challenge in right away. If it doesn't, I got to play my character, let my opponent quest again, and then challenge in. So they effectively get an additional quest period. If I'm behind and trying to catch up, then that's problematic, right? So Rush basically allows you to challenge the character one turn faster, which can make or break your results in the game. So very relevant ability, but you know already, even if you're new here, you know now that I hate kind of one use items. In this case, it's 2 use, but not repeated use. And, I've got to pay 2 the second time versus 1. I don't love this, but Rush is powerful enough that I think it still bears drafting and still bears going after. I don't think you're going to take it nearly as high as any of these, but I think you do want to actively take it. So it's probably in that C to C- territory. Nick Wilde is literally exactly the same as Higgins. So down here, there is a shift line for Nick Wilde, so I guess it goes above Higgins. Not that you should be actively shifting. All right, Olaf, Helping Hand, Inkable 2/1/1 lore. When this character leaves play, you may return chosen character of yours to your hand. Okay, so we're going to talk about boost in a second, because I bet you there's a few people out there, at least, that are thinking about the boost potential for this. Just without boost as a consideration. Below stat lines that we're looking for, in that all 1-drops are pretty much in this set. So we're not happy about the body for just the card. At this point, we can't say for the cost. Just using a card to have a 2/1 body, we're not happy about. But when you're able to return a character of yours, that can be useful for a number of reasons. If you've got a comes into play or leaves play ability, you can trigger those, or trigger the comes into play ability again when you play it the second time. If it's a larger body and it's got some residual damage on it, you effectively heal it by allowing you to reset it. You can protect a quester, right? You got a 2 or 3, or there's a 4-lore quester in this set, right? You quest with them, you would be exposing them, you challenge into something with 2 willpower left with Olaf, return it to your hand, replay it, and it's ready, right? So there's a few different ways to take advantage of that. None of those are super significant, and on the surface, those would probably not be sufficient for me to want to play Olaf, but we're in a set with a new ability called Boost. And Boost, as you've already seen from Flynn Rider, puts the card under the character with the boost ability. And you can do it multiple times. It's once per turn. And the interesting thing is how they've said the rule works is if that character with boost with the cards under it would be returned to your hand, all of them are returned to your hand. So now all of a sudden, Olaf becomes card draw with this boost mechanic. If you've boosted 2 or 3 cards under your Whisper, under your boosted character, and then return it with Olaf, now all of a sudden you've got the boost character plus all the cards that were underneath it. Who knows what they will be, but any card draw is good card draw. So I think Olaf holds a really interesting place in this set specifically. If this was in any other set, I might not feel that great about it, but in this set specifically it does. Now, again, there's not a lot of common and uncommon boost characters that I even want, but if I've got 3, 4, maybe 5 boost characters in my deck, I'm feeling pretty good about Olaf. If I've got more than that, I'm feeling great about him. If I've got, even 3 is a little dubious, but if I've got 1 and 2, I'm expecting that I'm never going to find my boost character in Olaf in the right timing, right? Think about how many cards you're drawing in your 40-card deck. If you mulligan all 7, which you're not going to do very often, you're digging 14 into 40. If you're mulliganing on average, you're probably mulliganing 2 to 3 cards on average. So you're looking at, say, 10 cards deep into a 40-card deck, you're seeing 25% of your deck, right? If you've got 2 cards out of 40, you're not likely to see it in those initial runs, right? There can be times where you never see it the entire time you're playing. Usually 3 rounds or 4 rounds might be what your event is, right? So don't rely on it if you've only got a couple of boost characters, but if you've got, say, 4 plus, definitely 3 borderline. I think I like him above, well, maybe below Illuminary here in a vacuum, and certainly higher, and maybe even higher than Flynn if I've got a lot of boost characters, right? All right. Swooping Strike. It is an inkable action. Each opponent chooses and exerts one of their ready characters. This is your perfect example of a D, right? This is a card that should be ink most of the time. You shouldn't be actively drafting, but if you drafted it and you need ink, every once in a while, this is going to be useful, right? Once we get to the end game, right, your opponent's usually only ever playing 1 character a turn. They're questing with all the rest, and they're playing their last character. So there's usually only ever 1 ready character. So the fact that you can exert that ready character, and if it's, a 2 or 3 lore quester, and you can exert it and then challenge it before it ever gets to quest, great. But again, that circumstances isn't going to come up enough for you to want to be actively going after this. But there will be times where that is a excellent action. So I would put it on the top of D, but I wouldn't be actively drafting this. But usually you have to include 2, 3, maybe 4 Ds in your deck at the end. You didn't actively draft them, but you need some ink at the end, right? The Horn King also has a shift line, another 2/2. Doesn't have the detective keyword, so we're going to put it under Nick Wild, but does have the shift line. Again, I am very much against shifting unless it's very lucrative for you at the time, but it's still relevant that the shift line exists. Robot Queen, inkable item. When you play a character, you may pay 1 ink and banish this item to deal 2 damage to chosen character. Very importantly, it doesn't have to be a damaged character like Chomp. So this is now, it's not Fire the Cannons when it's not uninkable, but it costs 2. I have already forgotten what the 2-cost action was that dealt 2 damage to a character or location. This doesn't deal it to locations, but who cares? Locations are terrible and limited anyway. What we care about is characters. So this is equivalent to the 2-cost inkable action that dealt 2 to a character, but you get it, again, you get it on layaway. You get to spread out the cost over 2 turns, and let it kind of sit off to the side. You can play this turn 1 and forget about it until you need it. Your opponent's going to know about it, so you won't get to surprise them, but still, I think imminently useful, not fantastic, but imminently useful. I would definitely put it above Mushu's Rocketeer in terms of items. Probably not much further than that because it's still only dealing 2 damage and it still costs 2 ink. So you're not getting great value out of it, but, well, maybe it deserves a little bit better than that. Somewhere around there. Okay. Almost there. The Sultan. Uninkable 1/1, a 2 lore. We've had this in the past at Rare. If you want to try and build an aggro deck, it could work very, very well for you. But I think especially given the fact that the vanilla stat lines are leaving this very far in the dust, I don't really want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Robot Queen laughs at the Sultan. I've got him as an F. Tinkerbell, inkable 3/1, 1 lore, vanilla. So this is the one I was alluding to earlier that we've gotten a little marginally better in the vanilla stat line for 1-drops in that this has only ever been an uninkable Toby in the past. Very good boy. So Mother Gothel can take out a higher cost character or higher willpower character if you trigger her ability. Tinkerbell won't, but Tinkerbell will always be 3, right? So there'll be times where Mother Gothel, probably a decent amount of times where Mother Gothel will be better, but Tinkerbell is always going to be better than Mother Gothel's baseline, which can be relevant if you want to quest out, right? If I want to quest with Tinkerbell and their best option is to challenge back with a 3/3, for example, great, Tinkerbell can take her out, whereas Mother Gothel couldn't. If I quested with Mother Gothel, they would take her out. So that is relevant. But with your 1-drops, you're probably not getting too greedy with the questing. You're probably fine to sit back on Mother Gothel and just use her to challenge into a character when she can get the 4 strength. But still, I think that Tinkerbell is very, very good, and I would put her right on par with Mother Gothel. I think I would use Mother Gothel's ability more and not rely on the ability to quest easier with Tinkerbell. But I think both of them are as fantastic as the 1-drops get. Webby Vanderquack. Inkable, 1/2, 1 lore. When you play this character, chosen character gets +1 strength this turn. If you've been around for a while, you know that my opinion of giving plus strength, especially +1 strength to a character, is not particularly high, especially when I'm left with a 1/2 body afterwards. And don't tell me about the shift line. Her shift character is a legendary. It's very unlikely you're going to get that. This would be one that I would be willing to shift if I was on the draw and I had it, but that's just so unlikely. Do not draft it for that. I would have her again in that kind of D territory. Might be that +1 strength comes in handy at some point, but likely not. And last, and certainly least, I don't know about least, the Henwin's vision is the least. We've got an inkable location here, Zootopia Police Headquarters. 1 move, 4 willpower, 1 lore. Once during your turn, whenever you move a character here, you may draw a card, then choose and discard a card. Not a bad ability, but 4 willpower on a location. Just locations, period. But especially one with 4 willpower is just so weak that you're going to waste a card on that. And I would put it above the castle here, but not by much. All right. That is it for our 1-drops. So as you can see here, and not surprisingly, there's nothing above a C+ for me here. Nothing has improved in the 1-drops, and everything else has only gotten better, so it's leaving the 1-drops in the dust, which means that this is probably going to be maybe the slowest set yet. We've got some decent removal, so that may speed things up a little bit. But still, don't invest too heavily in the 1-drops. In this set, I probably don't want more than 2 or 3 1-drops in my deck. And ideally, I would just have them be ones like Mother Gothel or Olaf that I can make use of later. I'm not expecting to be questing out heavily with my 1-drops. Thank you all for checking this out. Sorry I wasn't particularly high energy for our first video, but it is now 1:17 in the morning and he needs to sleep. But I'm trying to get this out for you in a timely fashion. So hopefully I'll get this out to you on November 1st, assuming I haven't slept in too late. Thank you all very much. We'll see you on probably later this afternoon with the 2-drop video, hopefully. Bye-bye.